You're still handing out bandages? Colonel Monroe, it's an honor to see you again.
And that salute was only the beginning.
10 years after my family erased me for becoming an Army physician, I returned for my grandfather's funeral. My father looked at my uniform and asked whether I was still handing out bandages. Then one of the most senior defense officials in Washington crossed the room, stopped in front of me, and saluted. But that salute was only the beginning. Before the night was over, I would discover that my grandfather had hidden a key inside an old silver lighter. My father had buried years of letters meant for me, and the family fortune was connected to a secret that could remove him from everything he controlled. Hello, everyone. My name is Colonel Evelyn Monroe. I am 38 years old, and I serve as a physician in the United States Army Medical Corps. For most of my adult life, my family treated those words as proof that I had failed. Before I continue, tell me where you are listening from. What country are you in right now? Please leave it in the comments below, because I would truly love to know how far my story has traveled. My grandfather was General Arthur Monroe. He taught me how to read a map before I was 10, how to stay calm when everyone else was afraid, and how to sit quietly beside someone who did not need advice, only company. He was the reason I believed service could be a life, not just a word people used in speeches. Yet for the final 10 years of his life, we barely spoke. And on the day we buried him, I learned that his silence had never meant what I thought it meant. The funeral reception was held at an officers' club in Virginia under a sky the color of steel. Rain clung to the tall windows, and the room smelled of coffee, polished wood, and expensive cologne. My family had always been good at turning grief into a formal event. There were retired generals beside defense executives, senators beside lobbyists, and men who spoke about my grandfather's loyalty while quietly exchanging business cards near the bar. I stood alone near a portrait of President Eisenhower, still wearing my army dress uniform. My gloves were tucked beneath my left arm. Rain had darkened the shoulders of my coat, but I had not bothered to dry them. That was when my father approached. Richard Monroe looked almost exactly as I remembered him. Silver hair, straight posture, a dark suit tailored so perfectly that it appeared to have been built around his pride. He looked at my face for less than a second, then he inspected my uniform, the ribbons, the insignia, the rank. So, he said loudly, "The Army still needs doctors like you." Several people nearby turned toward us. My father never believed in private cruelty when public humiliation could reach a larger audience. "Hello, Dad," I said. His mouth curved into a mocking smile. "Should we all line up if we need aspirin? Or are you still handing out bandages?" My younger brother, Caleb, laughed from beside the bar. Caleb was 34, vice president of strategy at Monroe Strategic Systems, and living proof that our father rewarded obedience more than ability. He raised his whiskey glass toward me. "Evie, I didn't know Army doctors were allowed off base for family events. They sometimes make exceptions for funerals," I replied. His laughter stopped first. My stepmother, Diane, passed behind him. She glanced at me, then turned away as though I were a server she had already dismissed. For one dangerous second, I felt 22 again. I felt like the daughter standing in my father's study with an acceptance letter in my hand, waiting for him to say he was proud of me. Instead, he had placed that letter on his desk and said, "A military doctor is still an employee, Evelyn. Monroes give orders. We do not spend our lives taking them." He wanted me to attend a private medical school, then join the executive side of the family's defense company. He had already planned my internships, my board seat, and even the kind of man he expected me to marry. I wanted to care for soldiers. I wanted to become the kind of physician who could work in a modern hospital 1 month and a field unit the next. I wanted my name to mean something because of what I did, not because it was engraved on a building. My father gave me one night to reconsider. The following morning, when I refused, he closed the education account my grandmother had created for me. He removed me from the family foundation. He told relatives that I had rejected the Monroe legacy. Then he told me that if I walked out, I was not to return. Grandfather was in the room. He said nothing. That silence hurt more than my father's ultimatum. I left with 2 suitcases, a partial scholarship, and $312 in my checking account. I worked nights. I borrowed what I had to borrow. I finished medical school, entered Army service, and built a life so far outside my father's approval that eventually I stopped expecting him to understand it. I missed family Christmases, weddings, and my grandmother's final holiday season. Invitations stopped coming, calls went unanswered. Photographs appeared online as though the Monroe family had always had only one child. Now, 10 years later, my father was standing at grandfather's funeral and using my career as a joke. I could have listed the places I had served. I could have told him how many surgical teams I had led, how many young physicians I had trained, or how many families had received a phone call they had feared would never come. But I had learned something important during my years away. People who were determined not to see you rarely changed because you gave them more evidence. So I simply said, I came to honor grandfather. Before Richard could answer, the room changed. Conversations near the entrance softened. A senator beside the fireplace straightened his jacket. 2 retired generals turned at the same time. People accustomed to power had recognized someone important. General Thomas Whitmore stood in the doorway in dress uniform, with 3 security officers behind him. Whitmore served in one of the highest-ranking defense positions in Washington. His photograph appeared in newspapers whenever budgets, national readiness, or military medicine became part of a public debate. My father knew him by reputation. Everyone in that room did. Richard stepped half a pace forward, already preparing the expression he used around influential people. Whitmore looked across the crowd. His gaze passed over the senators, the executives, and my father. Then he saw me. He began walking, not toward Richard, toward me. The room grew quiet enough that I could hear the rain tapping the windows. Whitmore stopped directly in front of me. Then he raised his hand in a formal salute. Training took over. I returned it immediately. "Colonel Monroe," he said, "it is very good to see you again." Behind me, ice shifted inside Caleb's glass. Whitmore lowered his hand and shook mine. "The soldiers from the Kandahar Field Hospital still talk about your team," he said. "So do their families." The silence around us deepened. Years earlier, a convoy Whitmore had been visiting was caught in an emergency outside Kandahar. Several service members were brought into our surgical unit within minutes of one another. Whitmore had stayed through the night. He watched my team work until exhaustion felt like another piece of equipment in the room. He helped make calls. He carried coffee. When the last patient was stable, he sat beside me on a concrete step without saying a word. That was how we met, not at a banquet, not through my family, on one of the worst days of several people's lives. Whitmore glanced toward the portrait of my grandfather near the entrance. "General Monroe spoke about you often near the end," he said. That sentence reached a place in me my father's insults could not touch. "He did?" I asked. Whitmore nodded, with great pride. My father was staring at me now. For the first time that day, he looked at the rank on my uniform as if it belonged to a language he had suddenly learned to read. My ribbons had not changed. My service had not changed. Only his understanding of who might respect me had changed. Whitmore moved away to speak with the other guests. Less than 2 minutes later, my father followed me into the hallway. There was no audience this time, no smile either. "How do you know Thomas Whitmore?" he demanded. For most of my childhood, that tone could make me feel guilty before I even understood the accusation. It no longer worked. "You meet certain people," I said, "on the worst day of somebody's life." "What does that mean?" "It means there is a great deal about my life you never cared enough to learn." I walked away before he could turn the question into an interrogation. Outside, cold mist drifted across the stone steps. I was almost at the lower landing when the doors opened behind me. Whitmore came out carrying 2 paper cups. "Coffee," he said, offering me one. I accepted it. Then he opened his other hand. A silver Zippo lighter rested in his palm. It was scratched around the edges and engraved with the insignia of my grandfather's 1st unit. Grandfather had carried it for as long as I could remember. Even after he stopped smoking, he kept it in his pocket and turned it between his fingers whenever he was thinking. I reached for it. Then I noticed a folded strip of paper taped underneath. One word was written across the front. "Evelyn." I recognized grandfather's handwriting immediately. "How long have you had this?" I asked. 6 weeks. Whitmore replied. "He gave it to me himself. He said I could place it in your hand only after his funeral and only when Richard was no longer standing beside you." My fingers went cold. I unfolded the note. "Locker 714, Officers Club at Fort Myer. The key is inside the lighter. I am sorry it took this long. Trust Miriam Shaw. Build something good. Grandfather, I lifted the metal cover." Beneath the cotton packing was a key so small that I almost missed it. "What is in the locker?" I asked. Whitmore shook his head. He did not tell me. He only said it contained the truth he should have given you years ago. I looked back at the reception hall. Through the glass doors, I could see my father watching us. Grandfather's funeral was not the end of anything. It was the moment the truth began coming out. I drove to Fort Myer alone. Locker 714 stood at the end of a quiet corridor inside another officer's club. The small key fit perfectly. Inside was a banker's box, a sealed envelope, and a photograph placed face down. I carried everything into a private reading room and locked the door. The envelope contained 12 handwritten pages. Grandfather had started the letter 4 years earlier and kept adding to it until 3 weeks before his death. He wrote about my grandmother, his military service, and the mistakes people make when they confuse keeping peace with doing what is right. Then he wrote about my father. He admitted that Richard had used money, access, and family loyalty to isolate anyone who challenged him. After grandmother became ill, Richard took control of appointments, household staff, and nearly every practical detail of grandfather's life. Grandfather told himself that confronting him would create chaos, so he remained quiet. One paragraph forced me to stop reading. I watched you leave this family knowing you were right. I told myself I was managing a conflict. I understand now that managing the comfort of powerful people is not the same as protecting the person they are hurting. My silence helped Richard punish you. I cannot ask you to call that love. I placed the pages on the table and stared at the wall. For 10 years, I had imagined what an apology from grandfather might sound like. In every version, I forgave him immediately. The truth was not that simple. His regret mattered. So did the years his silence had cost me. I continued reading. Grandfather said he had followed my career from a distance. Inside the box were letters from former commanding officers, medical directors, and colleagues from assignments in Texas, Germany, and overseas. He had never asked them to help me. He had only asked whether I was well. One commanding officer wrote that I had refused a promotion opportunity until a younger surgeon on my team received credit for a program he had designed. Another wrote that I had spent Christmas morning making rounds because most of my staff had children waiting at home. There were letters from Whitmore, too. A grandfather had known more about my service than anyone in my family. The photograph from the locker showed me outside a military hospital in surgical scrubs, laughing with 6 members of my team. I had no idea who had taken it. On the back, grandfather had written one sentence. "This is my granddaughter. She takes care of people. I am proud of her." I sat there for several minutes with the photograph against my chest. Then I opened the final folder. The first document created the Arthur and Evelyn Monroe Medical Legacy Trust. It contained $18 million in investments and grandfather's 31% voting interest in Monroe Strategic Systems. I was the sole beneficiary and the initial chair. The trust was beyond my father's control. But the next document mattered even more. It was an unfinished audit of the Monroe Family Foundation. For decades, the foundation had supported rehabilitation programs, military families, and scholarships for the children of service members. Publicly, my father often described it as the heart of our family legacy. According to grandfather's notes, nearly $6 million had been moved out of a medical rehabilitation project during the previous 3 years. The payments went to a consulting company called Atlas Ridge Advisors. The company's president was Caleb. I read the pages twice. There were invoices for outreach strategy, donor coordination, and operational planning. Most used vague language. Several had been approved by Richard in his position as foundation chairman. Grandfather had written questions in the margins. Where are the reports? Why was the clinic delayed? Why does Atlas Ridge share an address with Richard's private family office? Beneath the audit was a note from Miriam Shaw, grandfather's attorney. If Evelyn opens this box, she is to contact me before speaking to any member of the family. Arthur believed the payments might be improper. He requested an independent investigation and prepared protective changes to both his estate and the foundation. My phone rang. It was Caleb. I let it go to voicemail. 30 seconds later, my father called. I did not answer him either. Then a text appeared. "Whatever Arthur gave you belongs to the family. Do not make a mistake you cannot undo." The message did not sound like curiosity. It sounded like fear. I photographed every document and sent the copies to a secure folder. Then I called Miriam Shaw. She answered on the second ring. "Colonel Monroe?" I found the locker. There was a brief silence. "Then your grandfather was right," she said. "Richard did not find the key. Miriam asked me to meet her at 7 the next morning. She also warned me not to return to my hotel until she arranged for the original documents to be secured. "Your father has already called my office 4 times, she said. "He believes the will reading tomorrow will confirm him as the controlling family trustee." Will it? No. That single word carried 10 years of consequences. I stayed in the reading room until a bonded courier arrived. I kept grandfather's letter, the photograph, and the lighter. Everything else went into a locked case. When I finally returned to my hotel, Caleb was waiting in the lobby. He stood as soon as he saw me. "Evie, can we talk?" His voice had changed. The sarcasm from the reception was gone. "You had 10 years to talk," I said. "This is different, because grandfather left me something." He glanced toward the elevators. "Dad is upset. He thinks Whitmore gave you documents." What kind of documents would make him upset? Caleb's eyes shifted away from mine. That was the first answer he gave me. He tried a softer approach. "Look, I know things were bad when you left. I was young. I followed Dad. You were 24. That still feels young now. It did not feel young when you sent me a photograph of Christmas dinner with my chair removed from the table." His face tightened. He remembered. "So did I. What do you want?" I asked. "If grandfather left you company shares, do not vote until we explain the situation. The company employs 1,200 people. One emotional decision could hurt innocent families. There it was. He was already using strangers as a shield for choices he did not want examined." "Tomorrow morning," I said, "we will hear the will together." I stepped into the elevator. As the doors closed, Caleb called after me. Grandfather was confused near the end. The next morning, Miriam met me in a conference room overlooking the Potomac. She was in her early 60s, with calm eyes and the precise voice of someone who never wasted a sentence. She confirmed that grandfather had been mentally competent when he amended his estate. 2 physicians had certified it. A retired judge had witnessed the signing. Every meeting had been recorded. "I expected Richard to challenge you," she said. Then she showed me something the locker had not contained. For 8 years, grandfather had written me letters on my birthday. None had arrived. Miriam placed photocopies in front of me. Each envelope had been returned to her office after someone at grandfather's home instructed the courier service that I was not to receive family correspondence. The authorization carried my father's signature. I had spent a decade believing grandfather had forgotten my birthday. My father had made sure his words never reached me. The will reading began at 10. Richard sat at the head of the table, with Diane and Caleb beside him. My Aunt Louise joined by video. 2 foundation board members sat near the windows. My father did not greet me. Miriam read the ordinary gifts first. Grandfather left personal items to old friends, scholarships to the children of former staff members, and his military papers to a university archive. Richard received the Virginia house, but not the land beneath it. The land belonged to the medical trust and came with a 10-year lease that required market rent. Diane's mouth opened slightly. Caleb received $1 million, but payment was suspended until the independent foundation audit was complete. Any amount he was ordered to repay would be deducted from the gift. My father's face began to lose color. Then Miriam announced the trust. Grandfather's investments, his voting shares, his authority to appoint 3 members of the foundation board. All of it passed to me. Richard pushed back his chair. "This is absurd. She has not been part of this family for 10 years. Miriam looked at him over her glasses. General Monroe addressed that point in a recorded statement. She pressed a button. Grandfather appeared on the screen. He looked thinner than I remembered, but his eyes were clear. "If you are watching this," he said, "I am gone and Richard is probably angry." No one moved. Evelyn did not abandon this family. This family punished her because she chose service over control. I allowed that punishment to continue. The trust is not a reward for loyalty to me. It is an attempt to place responsibility in the hands of the person whose judgment I trust most. My father stared at the screen. Grandfather continued. "Richard, a family name is not a crown. It does not make every decision beneath it honorable. If the foundation's money was used properly, the audit will prove it. If it was not, then the Monroe name deserves the truth more than it deserves protection." The video ended. For several seconds, the only sound was the air conditioning system. Then Richard turned to me. "You arranged this. I almost laughed. I learned about it last night. You poisoned him against us. I spoke with him twice in 10 years. You controlled who entered his house, who handled his mail, and who drove him to appointments. If anyone had the opportunity to influence him, it was you. He stood. You will sign those voting rights back to the family. No, it was the same answer I had given him when I was 22. This time, he could not take my future away for saying it. The investigation began that afternoon. I appointed a forensic accountant named Lauren Paddle and an independent charity law firm. I told them to follow the records wherever they led, including toward me if necessary. For the next 5 days, I lived between conference rooms, secure video calls, and boxes of documents. Every few hours, a new piece of the pattern appeared. Atlas Ridge had received nearly $6 million from the foundation. It had only 2 full-time employees. Several reports listed on invoices did not exist. Money meant for a rehabilitation clinic had paid for private travel, a luxury office renovation, and consulting fees routed through companies connected to Caleb's friends. My father had approved each transfer. Then Lauren found the detail that changed the investigation. 3 approval forms carried grandfather's electronic signature after the date he had revoked access to it. The audit was no longer only about wasteful spending. It raised the possibility that someone had used his authorization after he withdrew it. I sat in Miriam's office reading the report when my father called. This time, I answered. Come to the house, he said. Alone. Why? Because I am still your father. That did not answer my question. His voice dropped. Because I am offering you one chance to end this privately. I agreed to meet him, but not alone. Miriam waited in the car, and I sent Lauren a copy of every document I carried. The Virginia house looked exactly as it had when I left. Tall white columns, black shutters, a circular drive bordered by trees my grandmother had planted. My father waited in grandfather's study. On the desk was a prepared agreement. He offered me $5 million if I transferred the voting shares, resigned from the foundation, and agreed that the audit would remain confidential. You think I came back for money? I asked. Everyone comes back for something. I came back to bury grandfather, and now you have turned his funeral into a takeover. I looked at the agreement. $6 million meant for wounded service members moved into Caleb's company. Grandfather's signature appears on forms after he revoked access. Which part of that do you want me to ignore? Richard walked to the window. The clinic was delayed. We needed to protect the company during a difficult quarter. The foundation had reserves. So you used a charity as your private bank. I moved resources between family interests. The families waiting for rehabilitation services were not an interest on your spreadsheet. He turned sharply. Do not lecture me about responsibility. I built everything that gave you your opportunities. You closed my education account and told me never to return. And yet you succeeded. Perhaps I made you stronger. That sentence told me more about him than the audit had. He had found a way to claim credit even for the life I built after he abandoned me. You did not make me stronger, I said. You made my life harder. The strength came from me. His expression changed. The polite offer disappeared. He warned me that reporters would learn I had been estranged from the family. He said company employees would blame me if the share price fell. He suggested the army might dislike the attention. I let him finish. Then I placed copies of the returned birthday letters on the desk. You kept these from me? For the first time, Richard looked surprised, was confused. Those letters would have reopened old arguments. They were mine. I was protecting the family. No, you were protecting your control over it. I slid the agreement back toward him. The independent board meeting is Monday at 9. You and Caleb will have the same opportunity to answer the evidence as everyone else. He stared at me across grandfather's desk. If you walk out with this audit, you are no daughter of mine. I picked up the lighter. You already used that punishment 10 years ago. It has no power left. One Monday morning, the boardroom at Monroe Strategic Systems was full before I arrived. Richard sat at the head of the table. Caleb was beside him with 2 attorneys. Foundation directors filled one side of the room, company directors the other. My father had expected me to enter angry. I entered prepared. I wore a simple dark suit, not my uniform. This was not army business, and I would not use my service as a costume in a family fight. Miriam came with me. Lauren carried the audit. An independent ethics officer attended by video. Richard opened by calling the investigation a misunderstanding created by an inexperienced beneficiary. Then Lauren began presenting the records. Invoice by invoice, transfer by transfer, date by date. Caleb claimed Atlas Ridge had completed valuable work that was difficult to measure. Lauren displayed the supposed reports. 3 were copies of public documents. 2 had been created the night after grandfather's funeral. 1 contained a spelling error in the foundation's own name. Caleb stopped speaking. Richard's lawyer argued that the transfers had been approved by grandfather. Miriam played a recording from 7 months earlier. Grandfather was seated in the same boardroom. Effective today, he said in the video, Richard Monroe and Caleb Monroe no longer have permission to use my signature or approve foundation expenses in my name. The 3 disputed forms were dated weeks later. One company director removed his glasses and placed them slowly on the table. Another asked Richard whether he had authorized the signatures. My father refused to answer. That refusal ended the room's remaining uncertainty. I made 3 motions. First, suspend Richard and Caleb from every foundation role pending the completion of the legal investigation. Second, recover all unsupported payments and refer the signature issue to the appropriate state and federal authorities. Third, separate the foundation permanently from Monroe's strategic systems so that no company executive could treat charitable money as an emergency reserve again. Because grandfather's trust controlled 31% of the voting shares and 3 board appointments, my support mattered. But I did not act alone. Director after director voted yes. Even people who had spent years agreeing with my father finally understood that protecting him now meant sharing responsibility for what he had done. The company board then placed Richard on administrative leave and opened its own investigation. Caleb was removed from his executive position before lunch. My father remained seated after everyone else stood. He looked smaller at the end of that table than he had ever looked at the head of it. "Are you satisfied?" he asked me. I thought about the question. 10 years earlier, I might have wanted him humiliated. I might have wanted him to feel every empty holiday, every unanswered call, and every moment I wondered whether choosing my own life had made me unlovable. But revenge had changed shape by then. I did not want his pain. I wanted his power to stop protecting his choices. "I will be satisfied," I said, "when the money is returned to the people it was meant to help." The investigations lasted 8 months. The foundation recovered more than $5 million through repayments, insurance claims, and the sale of assets tied to Atlas Ridge. Caleb surrendered his remaining inheritance credit as part of a civil settlement. Richard resigned from the company and every charitable board he had once controlled. The company avoided collapse because the directors acted quickly, protected the employees, and installed independent leadership. The authorities handled the signature matter. I did not ask for special treatment, and I did not interfere. Justice did not need me standing over it. It only needed the evidence to stop disappearing. During those months, my father sent me 3 letters. The first blamed grandfather. The second blamed Caleb. The third was only 4 sentences long. He wrote that he had confused obedience with loyalty. He admitted that he had punished me because my choice proved his plan for the family was not the only respectable one. He did not ask me to forgive him. I appreciated that because I was not ready. Forgiveness is not a door someone else gets to open from the outside. 1 year after the funeral, we broke ground on the Arthur and Eleanor Monroe Center for Military Trauma and Family Recovery. We built it on the land beneath the Virginia House. The house itself became administrative offices and temporary lodging for families visiting service members in long-term treatment. The gardens my grandmother planted remained untouched. The recovered foundation money paid for rehabilitation equipment. Grandfather's medical trust funded counseling, research, and grants for military spouses who had left jobs to become full-time caregivers. I did not leave the Army to run it. I appointed people with the experience to do that. My role was to make sure the mission remained larger than the Monroe name. At the opening ceremony, Thomas Whitmore stood in the second row. Miriam sat beside him. Several members of my old surgical team came from different states. Families I had met during my service filled the lawn. No politician spoke. No company logo appeared behind the stage. The first person to cut the ribbon was a retired sergeant who had waited 18 months for the kind of coordinated care the center would now provide. Before the ceremony, I placed grandfather's lighter beneath a glass display in the entrance hall. Beside it, I placed the photograph from the locker. The plaque did not call Arthur Monroe a perfect man. It said, "He learned that regret matters only when it becomes responsibility." I stood there alone after the guests had moved outside. For years, I had believed grandfather's silence meant I was forgotten. The letters proved he remembered me. But I also understood something more difficult. Love kept secret cannot protect anyone. Grandfather loved me. He was proud of me. He also failed me when courage was required. Both things were true. What made his apology meaningful was not the money he left behind. It was the action he finally took to correct what his silence had allowed. My father arrived near the end of the ceremony. He did not enter through the main gate. I saw him standing beyond the garden, away from the cameras and the crowd. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then I walked toward him. He looked older. Without the company, the assistants, and the people arranging themselves around his authority, he seemed like an ordinary man carrying the full weight of his own decisions. "The center is beautiful," he said. "It is useful," I replied. Grandfather would have liked that more. Richard nodded. "I saw your name on the program. It is in small print. You could have named the building after yourself." "That was never the point." He looked through the open doors at the lighter in its glass case. "He should have defended you that day." "Wes, so should I?" I waited. For once, he did not explain. He did not blame pressure, tradition, or his own father. He let the truth stand without trying to make it smaller. "I don't know how to repair 10 years, he said. "You cannot repair them," I answered. "You can decide what you do with the next 10. I did not embrace him. I did not invite him back into my life as though one honest sentence could erase a decade. But I gave him the name of a veterans family program that needed volunteer drivers twice a week. Start somewhere no one knows your title," I said. He took the card. Months later, I learned he was still driving. We speak occasionally now. Our relationship is careful, limited, and honest. I no longer measure healing by whether my father approves of me. I measure it by whether I can stand in the same room without abandoning myself. Caleb has never apologized without adding an excuse. I keep my distance from him. A shared last name is not an unlimited pass back into my life. As for me, I returned to my unit. The first morning back, a young captain knocked on my office door. He was considering a difficult assignment, but his family thought it would ruin his career. He asked me how I knew when to choose my own path. I looked at grandfather's photograph on my desk. Then I told him the truth. You may lose people when you stop living the life they designed for you. But if their love requires your obedience, what you are losing is control disguised as love. That is the summary of my story. My family erased me because I chose to become an army physician. 10 years later, I returned for my grandfather's funeral, where my father mocked the career he had never tried to understand. A formal salute exposed how little he knew about me. A lighter led me to hidden letters, a protected trust, and evidence that charitable money had been redirected for family benefit. I investigated the truth, removed my father and brother from the power they had misused, recovered the money, and turned my inheritance into a center that now serves military families. And this is what my story taught me. Your value does not shrink because the wrong people refuse to recognize it. Silence can become a form of betrayal, even when it comes from someone who loves you. Forgiveness does not require immediate trust, and justice does not require cruelty. Sometimes the strongest revenge is to take the power that was used to diminish you and turn it into protection for other people. My father once mocked me for handing out bandages. Today, those bandages are part of a place that carries my grandfather's name, serves thousands of families, and stands on land my father once believed he would control forever. He tried to erase me from the Monroe legacy. Instead, I became the one who finally gave that legacy a purpose. Thank you for watching. Please like this story and leave a comment below. And remember, a salute did not make me worthy that day. It only forced my family to see the worth they had ignored for 10 years.